morning, everybody. My name's Stewart Bamford. I work for Level 3 Communications. Good, no one threw anything. That's always a good start. First of all, I'd like to point out I'm not an IPv6 expert. I've spent many years in the IPv4 world like the rest of us, and this is kind of something that I threw together because a lot of people are going to be experiencing this in the next short time, whatever that may be. So, what I'm going to talk about today isn't an in-depth discussion on IPv6, and it's not an argument for or against IPv6 or all the usual things. We've been there before. It's a look at some of the issues that Level 3 hit when we were doing the implementation of IPv6 on our network, and some of the things that we looked at to get around those issues, and some of the ongoing issues and things that maybe you should be aware of if you're thinking about doing this in the future. So, firstly, just to echo some of the sentiments of the last speaker, not that many people in the world, compared to the IPv4 world, are taking IPv6 very seriously, especially in North America. More so they are in Europe and Asia Pac. So if you have a look at the main allocations of V6 space, it's interesting to see that if you compare it to the V4 space, there's an awful lot assigned to AppNIC and RIPE, and it's actually in use, and not an awful lot to ARIN, but you know, this is a couple of months old, but maybe this is changing soon. So, sure, North America isn't really looking at it in any great depth, but other places in the world are looking at it, and they are using it. And there is an increase in customer requests for IPv6 that definitely we're seeing, and I'm pretty sure that other people are beginning to see, even if it isn't someone coming along and saying, I want 240 gig of IPv6 connectivity. You know, it might just be part of a bid that goes with V4. And as policies, the politicians make their presence known, IPv6 will and is becoming more of a part of publicly funded bids, especially in the EU now, and will be in the US. I'm sure we're all aware of that. So, looking at the actual problems in deploying IPv6, there are four main issues that tend to hinder that I see. First one is actually making the decision. And that's a huge one, and not something that engineers can actually push managers very well on. Then there's a network, the actual network itself, so the technology of actually getting V6 running on your network. There's the people and politics. It kind of goes with the decision making, but a slightly different issue, more to do with acceptance of what you're doing. And then there's the systems, which probably is the most forgotten thing until you actually hit the problems. So making the decision. Sure, there's a lot of lack of desire to actually move towards IPv6, and you know, a lot of us have been guilty of that over the years. And whether it's actually going to be used in any great scale or not in the near future, who knows, but it does seem to be taking on a bit now. So people seem to be being pushed more by customer requirements than by the actual desire themselves to move towards IPv6. Again, because of these publicly funded projects and things where they say you must have a roadmap for IPv6 or you must include some IPv6 facility on your network. However, the traffic volumes are really not that high compared to IPv4. I mean, they're getting there, but they're still not that high. And therefore, the key point here is there's not much associated revenue with this traffic. And therefore, it's difficult to justify an awful lot of expenditure because of that. So the network itself, two main implementation rules. First of all, don't break the IPv4 network when you're implementing this. You might break it for other reasons, but you know, not because of IPv6. And don't spend much money because there isn't much associated revenue. So if you go along to your manager and say, hey, I want to roll out V6, give us $5 billion and I'll go out and do it. They're not going to go for that one. So don't break the V4 network. I think a status a lot of us are in now is that we need to have IPv6 functionality for the network, and we need to have it in the toolbox, but we don't necessarily need it everywhere right now and all nodes. It mustn't affect the V4 functionality. So, you know, you roll out V6 and break the V4 network, you're not going to have a nice day. Not all the kit out there on most people's networks support V6. They either don't support it at all, or they don't support it very well. So there's an awful lot of kit out there, for instance, process switches, V6 packets in a really ugly manner. So you don't need to have V6 functionality on every single box. You just need it on a geographical as-needed basis. So you want to have the ability, if someone comes along to you and says, I want this much v4 in this city. Oh, and I also want v6 connectivity. You know, how are you going to support that? The other rule, don't spend much money. So really, really difficult to justify any large capital expenditure on IPv6 because the return on investment just doesn't look too good in the short term. And none of us are working on a 10-year return, I'm sure. The increase in operating expenditure also needs to be considered. So there's a whole bunch of things that you'll end up spending money on, the people and the software support and all things like that. Now the next statement, not being able to support IPv6 on an entire global tier 1 network. Well, I know there's some people working on that, but it is a big problem. I mean, it's not something that's going to just roll out overnight. Supporting v6 when you've got tens of thousands of nodes isn't easy, especially when some of them don't support v6 or don't do it very well. And the more you look at it, the more costs there are when you start running these sorts of things. So, but I have heard that some tier 1s are doing this now. You know, some of them. Do we have a question already?
Please state your name.
Jared Mach, Vario. I'm a little puzzled by you're not going to be able to enable IPv6 entire tier 1 network when there's a number of networks that have already done it right now.
Well, yeah.
and have had it done for 2 or more years.
Well,
so
yeah,
I'm a little bit puzzled by that statement. Could you please elaborate on that significantly more?
Sure. There are some tier 1 networks, and I apologize for the politically charged statement. There are some large ISP networks that do support v6 now. I'm not sure whether they really support it native, complete end-to-end, whether the whole thing is. Sure some do. And you're going to say yes?
Yes, they do.
Okay, some do. And if you've managed to roll that out over a long time, maybe you were sensible enough to think about this, you know, many years ago. That's great, you probably can. My point here is, and I'll probably explain it a bit further, is that if you've got a network that is not v6 capable now, and it's a tier 1 size network, then rolling v6 across the whole thing now is going to be tricky. Okay, so that's probably a bit more clarity. If you've already done it, you've already spent the years getting there, yeah, you've got there. However, if you haven't got v6 on the network now, it's not just going to be a overnight, hey, let's go v6 everywhere. Does that kind of explain that one?
That helps somewhat, but I believe that you know it is not a significant project for someone to go around and change their point-to-point link allocation policies for internally to put on v6 addresses as well. Enable either the ISIS extensions for the v6 stuff, or if your network is running OSPF, to load the OSPF v3 code on there. And that way you get your IGP, and then you can set up a separate IBGP mesh for your v6 transport and v6 NRLI. So you can do the same thing on the same equipment and provide native connectivity instead of backhauling stuff halfway across the country or across the globe, as some people demonstrated in trace routes recently on the NANOG list.
Okay, 2 points. As I said, not every element of your network elements may support v6, so that's a problem. And the second point, you might say that just turning on a new IGP isn't a big deal. Yeah, it is. You know, if you say that, oh, we're going to turn on v6, I don't know what you guys all do for testing, but you know, I sure won't go and turn on any feature on the live v4 network that's carrying traffic that's earning us money. I would not go and turn a new feature on that until it's been through an awful lot of regression testing. And that's going to take time, and then you hit those sorts of bugs. So the whole point there is that you probably want to, well, from my point of view, to separate them out reduces that issue. And that's what I'm going to go into. Okay.
It's just my perspective that, you know, it seems to be that there's a number of providers that are either doing this or have done this in the past. And it seems that the number of regression type things that you seem to be concerned about, well, everyone's network is unique, and I'm perfectly willing to admit that our network may be unique and not directly comparable to anyone else's in the room, and I'm sure that's the case for you as well. That a number of the protocol things and stuff have been fleshed out in the testing by the vendors at this point, and it's significantly stable.
Okay, sure. Yeah, a lot of things have been tested by vendors, and then we find problems with it. not that vendors ever put bugs in code, but now, again, it's a point that if you haven't got any v6 on now, would you be happy going around and just turning on v6 on your v4 network without really thoroughly testing it, no matter what the vendors say? And, you know, I wouldn't. You know, nasty things happen when you break your IGP. So, what sort of things did we consider? So, as a telecommunications company, we considered, you know, a full overlay network, where it's really expensive, a lot of resources in use. Tunneling, yeah, kind of sucks, really. Lots of manual work, doesn't really scale very well. A complete IPv6 network deployment. So, as I was saying here, you know, not all the kit that you'll have on the network supports IPv6 in hardware or at all. So, you know, I'm sure we all know the boxes that are out there that they support X million packets of v4. You stick v6 in, and it, you know, churns out a few packets a second. You don't want to risk that v4 network. So, you don't want to bring down v4 by implementing v6, which is a functionality that isn't really going to earn you much extra revenue. That would be bad. So if you're going to start doing that, if you're going to start implementing it everywhere, you might have a huge number of different vendors. For instance, you might have a lot of different models, a lot of different vendors, and you're going to have to do regression testing for all of those for v6. And even that's difficult to justify. You know, you turn around to the engineering manager and say, hey, I want you to regression test v6 and the v6 routing protocols for the following X vendors and all the following models. And then they work out how much that's going to cost, you know, just in man hours and lab time. And then they say, well, how much is this going to earn us? And you sort of go a bit quiet on that point. Difficult to justify. So what did we do? A lot of people don't go this way, but we used our existing global MPLS network to use IPv6 with 6PE. So we rolled out some new boxes just to do the IPv6 functionality, which meant that it was completely separated from the IPv4 network. Well, they're dual stack boxes, but the v6 functionality doesn't actually hit the existing v4 network. So it gives you a cookie cutter approach where you can just turn around and say, okay, if we need v6 in a particular site, we can just drop a box in, plug it into the MPLS network, make it dual stack, bang, we've got a box that supports v4, v6, nice dual stack. We used our existing edge technology, so we used the same vendor and platform that we use for one of our edge boxes, so that if the whole thing does not work or earn us any money, we can just pull those back and use them for v4. And also using the 6P functionality, because of the edge platform we used, it was all processed in hardware and could run very, very quickly. So very, very quick recap on 6PE. It can be deployed in a multi-vendor environment. We specifically have, in the sort of way we've implemented it, you can connect servers to your 6PE devices, you can connect customers to the 6PE devices, either via native either just v6 or dual stack, or you can do it via tunnels. And you can connect your peers and all such to the 6PE devices without all of this, without affecting your v4 network, and that's kind of the key for us. So it's reasonably easy to configure. So from our point of view, we already had the MPLS and LDP and whatever functionality, so there was no extra configuration to put on there. You just need to give your 6P devices your full IPv4 routing to your source and targets, and so you can actually offer dual stack if you want to. And then you set up your BGP in the new funky address family format, which people are, I'm sure, getting too used to now. So just a quick example, you need to stick in there is the send label once you've actually got everything running. So from our point of view, the advantages of 6PE, you need it in a location, you drop in a box, it works. It's easy configuration, it's really quick to do, doesn't break your v4 network, either globally or in that site. And it can give you a fairly large geographic coverage without deploying humongous amounts of kit, which is going to cost you an absolute fortune. And all that traffic's usually hardware processed, so you're not going to turn around and say, oh, well, we can't do anything above 5 meg. Because, Disadvantages, well, a lot of people I know consider it to be a bit of a hack still. You still haven't got your native network, your IPv6 native network, so your core still isn't there. Not all devices are 6PE capable, so you're going to be fairly limited on potentially on the devices that can actually run as these points. And sure, if you need to one of the things here is that if you need to install v6 functionality in a city, it's going to be a new box. But in the big scheme of things, there's not there's some customers asking for it. You're probably going to want to do this on a limited basis on certain specific sites. So yeah, you need to install a new device. And also, you're going to have to teach people how to use 6PE and how that works, as well as how IPv6 works, and that's a whole issue in itself. So for us, the timescales, so we made the decision quite late, really, in the world of things. So we made the decision to deploy at the start of 2005. The training and the engineering testing took a couple of quarters. The physical implementation of the boxes by the end of Q2. And we completed that by the start of Q3. So it's a fairly short timescale here. And again, because we're doing things in this way where it's separated from the v4 network, you can do things on a shorter timescale because you haven't got so much risk involved and so much work involved in rolling out new config and code and whatever across hundreds of boxes, potentially thousands. And it's all running as expected. There's very, very low maintenance overhead, very few issues that we've hit with that. So it all seems to be running quite neatly. Looking back on that, yeah, it's been pretty good. We haven't affected the v4 network by doing this v6 stuff. There's been very limited expenditure, but sure, what works best for us doesn't work necessarily best for other people. Some people might have a core and already tested the code, and it might just be easier to turn native v6 on everywhere. That's fine. But this is just how we saw it and how other people might benefit from looking at that. So what's next for us? Well, more of these 6P devices in the medium term. Some more native peering connections. We've got some now, but we're building on those. The big thing is educating people on IPv6 within the company, because it's, I'm sure we all know it's difficult to employ people with good v4 experience. If you turn around and say, well, you've got to know everything about v6 as well, it's going to be difficult. Doing billable dual stack connectivity to customers, that's a systems issue, which I'll come into in a minute. And in the long term, going to a native IPv6 core, maybe at some point, maybe if it starts earning money and we go for it. And IPv6 support for the back-end systems, it's a huge issue. So, quick look at the people and politics. From the people side of things, people fall into one of the following categories. You either have the pro IPv6 people, tend to be engineers, they say, we should do v6. You get the anti-v6 people, again, mostly engineers, who say we shouldn't do v6. And you get the accountants view and say, I don't care what we do, just earn me some money. Just make some profit. And then you get the other one, what the hell is v6? What? So winning people over between those categories is one of the biggest tasks, and possibly the single biggest task. Because if someone really doesn't want to do v6, it's so much a philosophical issue and not a practical one at the moment that it becomes difficult to win an argument. A huge issue, training people. So you think about the amount of people that have to know something about v4 now. You're going to have to train all those about v6. So your sales and marketing people, that'll be fun. Your installations, your support, your NARC, your entire engineering department, and all the rest. Maybe even management, who knows. That's going to be very time consuming and really expensive. And sure, as soon as you train these people, the risk is they'll go. And then you've got to train the next person. So I think in a lot of organizations, the v6 support ends up being a real specialist small team of one. Bob, the IPv6 bloke who sits in the corner, who does this over lunchtime sometimes, and that's a risk that you end up going in that direction. So other political problems, what service level agreement do you provide? So a lot of the time it's not possible to support the same service level agreement. A lot of service providers offer it on a best effort basis. We do at the moment. How can you bill this? That's often a problem. So who's responsible for the installs and support? Again, you end up, anything that goes to v6 ends up going to Bob, the IPv6 bloke, who now never takes a lunch break. And he does anyway. And because some of the people are so anti-v6, for maybe right reasons, whatever, it ends up being still a philosophical debate ongoing. So the systems, which is one of the biggest areas that people often forget about when they're doing this. So how many systems, back-end systems, are there running on in your business? And how many of them do support v6 and would need to support v6? How many of them are bespoke, written in-house? And then if they are, who wrote them? As I said, Steve, the scripter here, and he left. We don't have the source code for that anymore. Oh dear. So, you know, if you're going to start rolling v6 functionality into all your systems, that can be a big task, and can cause, you know, it's going to be a huge investment to do that. It's going to be a lot of time for your IT department, who have probably got better things to be doing, as they see it. So what sort of systems am I talking about? Well, everything here and everything else you can think of. So all your DNS, IP allocations, your network monitoring, that's a big one. Sales and billing, all your trouble tickets, your network inventory systems, all your databases that hold all the information. How many of those have you got out there at the moment? If you've got the little thing with all the dots in, you just go and fill out the IP addresses, you know, that's going to be a problem. And I'm sure everyone's got all those other scripts kicking around and all their other systems and servers. You know, how many of those are going to need to support v6 if you're going to support this in the same level as v4? That's a question you need to go away and ask yourself. So, a quick conclusion, you know, moving to v6 for some people can be easy if you're lucky. If you haven't got that huge network, it's, you know, if you've got 4 or 5 devices, yeah, that shouldn't be too difficult. The larger network you've got, the harder it can be, especially if you've got a big variety of kit. It's difficult to justify all that, so the finance and the network and the human resources required. It's difficult to turn around to people and say that you need to do that when potentially we've all got more important things to be doing that could earn us money today. The ongoing support of it can be really tricky because, again, you've probably got a limited number of people who are supporting this. And, you know, sure, if they go, then you're left with this little outcast network with no one to support it. But the later you do it, the more difficult it's going to be. So one of the things about doing it like this is that you build some knowledge within your company about v6. So it gets you some way of thinking about v6 without having to spend a huge amount of money on it. So perhaps you need to start thinking about it now, maybe. So some takeaways there. Start thinking about where do you really think it's going to be going? Do you really think it's going to be nowhere? A lot of people think it's never going to be an issue. And maybe that's true. I'm sure nobody can say for certain. But hey, it might be. And there's a lot of political issues that might well make this something that you need to start doing at some point in the future, so you're best to start thinking about it now. Do you think I'll have to do this? Do you think you'll actually have to deliver it? So if people out there are doing it, do you think your customers will actually come along and ask for this? Well, yeah, have a think about that. So have a look at your network inventory, have a look at your network out there now, and ask yourself, you know, do all these boxes support v6? You know, if we had to turn on v6 tomorrow, is it even going to work? You know, have I got kit that I bought 5, 8, whatever years ago that, yeah, doesn't even support v6 at all, or supports it really badly in software or whatever? So who in your organisation knows about v6 as well? I mean, there's probably some people who read up about this in their own time, who now you probably want to be like nudging and saying, so, you know, you want to start thinking about v6 properly, maybe. You know, so have a little think about who actually knows about anything to do with this technology. And have a think about what back office systems, as I said, just have a think about the list of everything that you'd need to support v6 in if you were going to be doing that you support v4 in now. It's probably a longer list than you think it is. That's just about it. Any questions?
We have a few minutes. We can take a few.
Randy Bush, IIJ. The third category of person, the one who wondered if you're going to make money, you know, if the v6 deployment is a loser today in dual stack, 6PE as a deployment technology, is it any closer to the x-axis, and does it even cross it?
Well, it kind of depends on your situation, sure. So if you have a customer who says, I want v6 and it's going to be sending you this much traffic, then you've got to look at how much it's going to cost you to support it everywhere, and then how much it's going to cost you to just support it on specific boxes doing 6PE. And my point of view is that it probably is more likely to make you money quicker doing it like this, because you haven't got quite so much expenditure, capital expenditure and operating expenditure to actually get to the point where you're carrying the traffic.
Hi, Ted Seeley from Sprint. Same question, a little different angle on it though. One of your first slides talked about adoption, and you said you had EU, North America, and Asia Pac up there. I'm curious if you can actually answer this. What percentage of customers asking you for v6 capability pay for it?
Who actually asks for it and then pays for it?
Yeah. What is the paying percentage of people asking for V6?
Okay. The amount of people that are actually asking us generally for V6 is a small percentage, but it tends to be in the higher end category. So a lot of large EU projects will actually turn around and say, you know, we want a lot of V4 capacity and a reasonable amount of V6, and we'll pay for it. Pretty much everyone who asks for V6 expects to pay for it as a customer point of view now.
Interesting. Okay. It's a little different here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Peter Schoenmaker with Vario. I was wondering, are your 6PE boxes, are those new boxes you're buying, or your recycling boxes? Because when I look at what you presented, I see actually a significant amount of cost, both capital intensive, because you have to buy new boxes, also operationally, because it's not something that your operations people are familiar, and it's a new technology basically overlaid on top of a network that's already existing. Mm-hmm. And then I also see a lot of provisioning time or availability for customers who do want to purchase the IPv6 service. So if somebody wants to buy it in Amsterdam, you guys have to go out, install a box, turn it on. So did you see a lot of cost actually in that? Because I see one of your goals seems to be to reduce cost, but
sure,
everything you presented to me appears to be an increase in cost.
Yeah, it depends how you look at this. So first of all, I am allowed to say that we use the same edge technology we use the same device that we use for standard V4 connectivity. We use it for these 6P devices, which is the SUP 720 platform. Those devices are pretty standard for us, and we roll, it's a fairly standard device. We roll them out all the time. For us, we don't, because the number of customers that actually ask for V6 at the moment are quite small, but they tend to be fairly high end. We want to be able to offer this V6 functionality. So we don't actually have to deploy it in a great number of locations. So the trade-off here is, if the number of customers is fairly small, but significant, significant customers, then you don't have to deploy in too many locations. And that probably costs you less than the entire expenditure of moving your entire existing network into V6. But it is a trade-off.
What was your the main box that was your limitation in doing IPv6 on your network?
I'm sure we all, there are a number of devices that I'm sure we're all aware of out there that don't support V6 very well.
Let's take the folks who are over here and Steve, and then cut it off so we can keep moving on.
Okay.
Hi.
All right. My name's Chris. I work for MCI or UNet or something like that today. So I have a security question really about 6PE and about providing service for your customers. 6PE, and as far as my understanding of us looking at it, is your LSP actually terminates on the edge device. So if you get enough traffic toward the edge customer, you could potentially lose your edge device, and you have no way to filter it aside from just removing the LSP from the device. Is that correct in your case?
Sorry, could you run that by me again? It kind of got an echo.
Okay, so somebody spins up the largest, let's say, DDoS botnet in V6 ever, right? 1.5 million hosts. And they aim it at one of your customers who's V6 connected over your 6PE network. You have no way of filtering that traffic in your core. Your edge device has to do it all. And if you get enough traffic to blow out your edge device's uplinks, you have to remove 6PE service from that device, right?
I guess potentially.
Potentially. So that impacts all the 6PE customers there for one silly customer who upset somebody. Have you gone? And the follow-on really is have you gone back to the vendor and asked for some ability to filter inside of LSPs?
Not been an issue at the moment.
Not been able to get them to do it, or not been able to ask them?
Oh, well, it's not something we've looked at the moment.
Say that again?
I don't think that's something we've actually had to consider at the moment.
Okay. Just curious, because we have to ask vendors for that, by the way. So, thank you.
Filtering at the edge for us is possible, though. It does it in hardware. So.
Okay, I'll go. You mentioned that customers are willing to pay for V6. Are they willing to pay a premium for V6, or do they want to pay the same rate per bit as for V4?
I'd say same rate.
Okay.
The way we actually implement the V6 connectivity to customers ends up being the same rate for V4 as V6. Though I do actually see that some people are actually willing to pay a premium for it. But as at the moment, it's difficult to offer entire company support. It would be difficult for us to justify charging people even more money for something that's potentially got less people supporting it.
Right.
Jason Schiller, UUNet, MCI. I have 2 questions. The first one is, are you doing labeled V6 BGP as a full mesh between all your 6PE devices? And if so, do you think that this will hit scaling limitations, driving you to do V6 in the core?
Yes, and yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Sure. At the moment, it's, as I've said, it's not a huge amount of devices that we're running at the moment. So, yeah, it's a full mesh right now. It won't be for long. So, we're looking at the next way of scaling that back up.
And the other question I had was, you did say that you want to eventually get to native V6 in the core. Do you think that doing 6PE as an intermediary step makes that migration more difficult, or have you considered that?
Okay, well, I'd like to see a V6 native core. I'm sure there are lots of people who probably wouldn't. From my point of view, yes, it does make it easier, purely because if you've got some V6 functionality out there and people can actually see that it does earn you some money, then they start to like it more. At the moment, for a lot of people, it's something they've never actually encountered in practical sense. They've never actually seen it earn them any money. So if you have any form of V6 out there, people start to actually learn about it, and then they start to accept it, and then it's easier to justify doing it in other places.
I guess my question is from a technology standpoint. Is it easier to go from no V6 at all straight to native versus to go from 6PE to native in terms of a migration?
I mean, that depends on your network. From my point of view, I'd say that 6PE probably does make things easier because you do actually get some... Okay, the 6PE boxes that we've got actually are just a superset of the V4 ones. So we take an exact config of the V4 standard edge device and plumb V6 on the top. So it does mean that if we want to start rolling V6 onto all the other devices, we know that various things don't break. So yeah, it kind of does make it easier, but it depends on your own network.
Okay, last one.
Peter Schoenmaker with Vario. I was just wondering if you tell us how you're handling your pairing and your interconnects with other providers using the 6PE boxes.
Ooh, pairing. Okay. We're trying to do everything as much as we can native on these 6P devices directly. In some cases, that's not possible, so we end up doing tunnels. But yeah,
So is it mostly native now, or mostly tunnels?
Actually, because of the way we've tried to push it, it is actually mostly native. So, to be honest, it's kind of easier at the moment to use. If you're not going to roll out a complete V6 native core, then you probably aren't going to have V6 on all the devices that you currently do private pairing arrangements on. And that's kind of an issue. So you end up doing V6 pairing with people in different places, maybe at exchange points. But it's a whole separate issue there.
So do you see providers adding private interconnects for just V6?
I'm sure at some point in the future, if the whole thing actually starts making lots of money, then yeah. Probably dual stack.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers.